And good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see you, and thank you very much for taking the time and trouble to join us on this, the first of our series of webinars aimed at new registrants with a view to ensuring that the requirements, the obligations on you as new registrants in relation to the continuing professional development scheme are taken forward positively. So, as Andrew said, I'm Nick Jones. I'm the Chief Executive and Registrar of the GCC and have been since February 2019. So it's coming up to my 5-year anniversary. It's a real privilege to do the job. It's a great job. I enjoy it enormously, and it's great to work with a fantastic set of colleagues, some of whom are on the call today. So I'll be speaking to you for a few moments about some of the principles and the contexts in which we're trying to locate the CPD scheme. And then Jamie will fill in any gaps, things that I've not covered. And then we're going to pass on to Rob Finch. Rob is the CEO of the Royal College of Chiropractors, and he's going to be speaking in a little more depth about the college's PRT scheme, which I know some of you are engaged in. And if you're not, we're going to be encouraging you to do so. And then one of the things that we've introduced around the CPD requirements relate to directed learning. And the directed learning for the year we're in relates to qualities, diversity and inclusion. And it's great to be joined by Philippa Oakley from the Oakley Partnership. Philippa is also a chiropractor and a registrant, and she's been working very closely with the GCC over the last year or two to support us in our work in embedding an equalities framework into all that we do. So we're covering quite a lot of ground today. We'll go at a fair pace, but there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. I think we'll do the talk first, and then there should be 20-25 minutes towards the second half where we can open it up to the floor. And please, 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 these things are most successful when there's a good dialogue between us and you. So store up your questions. We'll be turning the microphones on, and also the chat bar is also available if you don't feel very comfortable in asking questions. Andrew will be keeping an eye on that, and we'll let you know the answers to those questions. All right, so just wanted to step back a little bit and to welcome you to the profession, a vibrant profession. We've got nearly 4,000 registrants on the list now, and it's a growing profession. It's a positive profession. So well done for you for joining it. And I think you were the cohort who probably suffered a bit with COVID and the privations that caused and the disruption to your program. So a special congratulations and well done for all that you achieved in that period. And we're really looking forward to seeing how you get on and making a fantastic contribution to health and healthcare and dealing with patients. I expect you're getting more experience and getting more used to that every day in which you're working. I'm confident you're probably able to deal with anything thrown at you in practice, given your recent experiences. I just wanted to say a few words. You will have studied, no doubt, in at least some depth what the GCC get up to. A reminder, I suppose. So 4 main responsibilities that we have: maintaining this register of chiropractors. It's a national UK register, and a person cannot practice or describe themselves as a chiropractor unless registered with the GCC. And one of the things you have to do to stay registered with the GCC is to pay your fee. That's kind of a given. And also to ensure that you complete your program of continuing professional development and any other requirements that we throw at you. So that's the fundamental place of CPD in the GCC's activities. Second area, we uphold the code for standards of conduct, performance, and ethics for chiropractors. So if you think about regulation, a regulator's fundamental job is to establish standards. In doing so, the process of establishing standards is catalytic. It incentivizes you to act in certain ways. And this year is a very important year for the GCC because we're going to have a fresh look at the code of practice, since it was last changed and updated in 2016. So very important year. And we're going to be making, I think, some bold changes to ensure that it keeps up to date with current requirements and expectations. Certainly going to be strengthening equalities aspects, certainly going to be strengthening consent, and also getting ensuring that it speaks to the interests of patients. And we've spent a lot of time over the last few years ensuring that we've got a patient voice in our ear, where perhaps previously that wasn't always the case. And then thirdly, the area we're probably best known for is acting if a chiropractor fails to maintain or meet the standards contained within the code. And it's not a great process to find yourself in. It's a very small minority. Around about 70 or 80 complaints are received a year, and only a few of those are upheld. So clearly, the vast majority of the profession doesn't find themselves undertaking practice or behaving in a way which causes us to investigate. But nonetheless, that's an area where we spend quite a lot of resource and quite a lot of time. And I think one of the things I would say for CPD, continuous learning, keeping you fresh, keeping up to date with what's going on, is that you've got a much better chance of not finding yourself in that court. And then finally, setting educational standards for individuals training to become chiropractors. So, of course, you've completed your study most recently, your studies, and you've now joined the world of work. You're on the register. My strong recommendation to you is that you see this as the start of your journey of learning, not the conclusion of your recent studies. Being part of a profession is a special privilege. It's a special responsibility. And one of the things that professionals must do is to keep up to date with developments and requirements and everything that goes with being professional. So CPD is an essential part of a chiropractor's professional life. It helps to enhance and maintain your professionalism through continually reviewing and updating your skills and your knowledge. And that in turn helps you to practice at a high quality level, practice safely and effectively as far as patients are concerned. And all registrants, whether you're newly qualified, whether you're part of the well-established profession, whether you're practicing or non-practicing, must keep up to date with the latest developments within the profession, including those relating to legislation, to technique, to ensure you're acting in your best interests and also patients' best interests. I'm often reminded when I get on a plane and I look at the pilot preparing for takeoff, and I think, I hope to goodness the pilot's kept up to date with their training. I hate for anything to happen. And I suppose we moan and groan, and we might grumble a bit about the annual process. But I think if you see it as a burden, if you see it as a once a year task you've got to get through, I think you're missing the point. I'm human. I understand deadlines and other pressures and so on. But I think the more you can conceive of your continuing development as a process, as part and parcel of being a professional, the less painful the annual round of making your submission to the GCC will be. As I say, the CPD program is our way of ensuring that you're continually broadening and deepening your knowledge. And we're required to do so because the legislation sets out what you must do and what we must do within our rules. And those rules are pretty inflexible. That said, they're not unreasonable. And we think that we've got enough flexibility to ensure that we introduce the appropriate levels of humanity and that it has the impact that we want it to have. So I really want you, as new graduates, speaking to you as the registrar, I really want you to start as you mean to carry on. And one of the things that we've introduced over the last few years to support new registrants, newly qualified registrants into practice, is to ensure a focus on clinical governance, those aspects of being a health and care professional, which will enable you to practice more safely, to ensure that your record keeping is of a good standard, to ensure that you're auditing practice and outcomes, and that you're essentially providing a safe and effective service and safeguarding high standards of care. Clinical governance has been abroad within the health and care setting for 20 years plus, and it's a well-trodden path, and it's demonstrated to be effective in terms of ensuring those high standards of care. The safety of patients depends on good quality clinical governance arrangements. So we've really set out that you're expected to focus on that in your first year. So we want you to reflect on your skills and understanding of a range of areas of clinical governance as specified by us, and I'll say what they are in a moment, and also reflect on and address any aspects of clinical governance that require development, require your additional work, and so on. Now, these activities will form part of your expected 30 hours of CPD. I congratulated some registrants earlier this year who'd completed many hundreds of hours of CPD a year. So you really must see 30 hours as a floor, FLOOR, not FLAW, and look to not necessarily do 180 hours or 200 hours, whatever it was I was congratulating a few registrants on doing, but certainly don't put a limit on your CPD if after your reflection you've identified some learning requirements. So the 6 areas of clinical governance are standards-based care, using evidence to inform practice, clinical audit, safety incident reporting and learning, patient-recorded outcomes, patient satisfaction measures, and then finally, reflective practice. Now, each of those are set out very clearly on the GCC website, and I urge you to make the GCC website your friend. There are a significant amount of resources on the website which will support you not just in your CPD activities, but in terms of guidance to underpin some of the aspects of the code of practice, some really good videos from professionals, from fellow professionals, some nice things on there which will enhance your learning and enable you to fully participate in the CPD round. Now, one of the things that I will say up front is that your participation in the Royal College's PRT, Postgraduate Training Programme, is a very straightforward way to address and meet those clinical governance requirements that we're setting out in year 1. So I'm going to just wrap up with a few concluding remarks from my perspective. Keep in touch. We have a newsletter which goes out monthly. Please ensure you review that and review that carefully. That will take you to the GCC website if you click on a few of those articles. And while you're at the GCC website, you can have a look around. Secondly, I take every opportunity I can to remind registrants and professionals that the NHS is under massive pressure. The demand for MSK care has never been higher. 7.3 million UK work days are lost to MSK disorders every year. deepen your connections with the NHS, deepen your connections with the public health system, deepen your connections with the local general practitioners and your local health services. I'm not saying that you need to go and work for the NHS, but I am saying it's incumbent upon all of us working in the system to work with the NHS, with GPs and other health professionals. Simply stated, copy the GP into everything that you do. Reach out to local provision, get yourself known. It's not only good for business, but also for the reputation of the profession, and the profession increasingly being seen as a modern health and care professional. So my task was to introduce you to CPD and to the context in which CPD sits within the GCC's framework. I'm now going to hand you on to Jamie to pick up on anything that I might not have covered in terms of the rules and so on, and then we'll invite Rob to speak about PRT. Jamie, was it anything I haven't covered?
I think you've covered the majority of it, Nick. The only thing I'd probably add is that it's worth remembering that you've got a year to complete the clinical governance CPD from the date that you were registered.
Right. Good point. And I should have said as well that submissions for the CPD ran at end of August 2024, and this year we are going to be much stricter in terms of enforcing that deadline, and we'll obviously issue lots and lots of reminders, but we were a bit disturbed last year in the lax approach taken by some, not all by all accounts, by all accounts, but there was a slightly lax approach, and we need to set the standards and ensure that the deadline is met this year. So a slight waving my bony finger at this point. Unless there's anything else, Jamie, I'll invite Rob to introduce himself and the Royal College and to speak about the PRT scheme. Rob, over to you.
Lovely, Nick. Thanks very much. I'm going to just share a few slides with you while I'm speaking. So I'll just do that now. So I've been introduced, but just to remind you, I'm Rob Finch. I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal College of Chiropractors, and I'd like to add my own congratulations and welcome to that given by Nick. I'm sure I've spoken to many of you before about the PRT, Postgraduate Training Programme, that's operated by the RCC on behalf of the profession. And I'm sure many of you are already enrolled. Some of you may not be. Just to remind you, if you're not sure about the RCC and where it fits into the profession, the RCC basically sits alongside and complements the roles of the professional associations and also the GCC. And our main purpose, and my sort of elevator statement, if you like, is that the RCC promotes and fosters quality, safety, and professionalism in chiropractic education, practice, and research. And so most of what we do is directed towards that sort of overview statement. And you may have seen we've published a number of, and we go on to publish a number of documents, various professional standards and guidance and so on, to assist you in providing safe and high quality care. So I think you can probably tell straight away that complements the GCC's role very much. So the PRT program, GCC has asked me to speak briefly about this. So just to provide a sort of an outline, if you like. And then I want to focus specifically on the clinical governance CPD that Nick's already mentioned. So just a few points about the PRT program, and I'll let you read this while I'm talking. It's operated by the Royal College of Chiropractors, and it has a very long history going back a number of decades. It hasn't always been run by the Royal College. Royal College hasn't always been in existence. And in fact, at different times in the past, more than one program has been operated. But for the last 20 years or so, the PRT program has been the unified postgraduate training program for new chiropractic graduates in the UK. Its overarching purpose is to support recent graduates in their first year or two in practice. And as I say, when I speak to students, it's all about helping to smooth the transition from the student environment, so the educational environment, to the environment where you're an independent practitioner. It has a range of components that are alluded to in that list. So it includes mentorship. So you're partnered with a mentor that we call a PRT trainer. That's usually the senior chiropractor you're working with in your practice. It involves interaction with your peers. So there's an element of peer group support and learning with your peers. There's a range of online learning resources available to you. But fundamentally, the PRT program is all about providing a structure for your CPD in the first year, essentially, because what it does is it helps you identify what your learning needs are, and you do that during that first year alongside your mentor, just to make sure that you're developing in those areas, you're developing your proficiency in those areas that are particularly pertinent to you. The advantages of PRT are many. I mean, one of the important points to make is that if you participate in the PRT, that can essentially provide all your CPD for the year. I mean, Nick mentioned that the basic requirement is 30 hours. And of course, you may do many more than that, but the basic requirement is 30 hours. And the PRT program provides at least that much, because all of your interactions, all of your meetings with your mentor are essentially small group clinical meetings. And so you can claim learning with others CPD for that, if it's a learning experience for you. The interaction with your peers, that's also learning with others. The online CPD, sorry, the online learning that you do is also part of CPD. So the online learning you do for your PRT program. So it very quickly adds up to a significant number of hours of CPD during that first year of your practice. And also, if you're participating in the PRT program, then you have access to all the RCC member benefits. And of course, many of you, if not all of you, are also members of professional associations. But the RCC provides slightly different things. A very large number of live webinars, access to our TV channel, where there's a large back catalogue of recorded webinar presentations, access to a global education network of webinars delivered by experts from all around the world, access to full text journals through our Discovery service. There's our winter and summer conference. There's a whole range of RCC member benefits, and those are all part of the PRT program. But the focus is very much on those things that I mentioned before. So quality, safety, and professionalism. And I don't think anyone can argue with the importance of those sort of facets of chiropractic practice. So just to move on then specifically to this issue of clinical governance. Now, within the PRT program, it just so happens that those topics of clinical governance, which Nick mentioned, they are part of the PRT program. So we have online learning modules, so things that you do in your own time within the PRT program. So Nick gave you the list already. So standards-based practice, that's all about how to use published standards. Using evidence to inform practice is all about, you know, the relevance of the evidence component of evidence-based practice. Clinical audit is about measuring performance against a given standard. The safety incident reporting and learning is all about sharing adverse incidents and near misses and learning from the collective experience of the profession. And you can participate in safety incident reporting and learning through using the CPERLS system, which if you're involved in the PRT, you will have come across, and you may have come across anyway. That's actually something else that's operated by the RCC. So it's an online system where you can report safety incidents safely and anonymously, and as I say, share and learn from that collective experience. Reflective practice is all about learning through reflection on doing in order to improve your practice, and that's very much what PRT is all about, actually. So reflecting on your learning needs and reflecting on your activities in order to identify your learning needs, and learning from that whole process. And then finally, PROMs and PREMs. That's all about using tools, established tools, which are available to you within the chiropractic profession very readily. And those tools are to measure clinical outcomes from a patient perspective, and also to measure patient experience, which is extremely important. And you can, using those tools, you can collect vital data, which really gives you insight into how well you're doing in your practice, and who doesn't want to know about that. So those are the different areas. Those are part of PRT, and as Nick said, they're also part of the requirement the GCC has of you in terms of your CPD in your first 12 months of practice. And just to reiterate what Nick was saying, probably the most straightforward way for you to address this particular requirement is via the PRT program. So that I've just made that point on that final slide there. PRT clinical governance modules essentially equals GCC focused CPD for recent graduates. I just want to make one final point about PRT. I mean, I perhaps sound like I'm doing a bit of a hard sell, but PRT is all about supporting you. It's not about organisations trying to get money out of you. Sadly, we do have to charge you a little bit of money to do the PRT, but I hope I've convinced you that there's a lot of value in the programme, including the GCC CPD requirement that I mentioned. But I think there's an important point here, and that there's nothing in the PRT, there's nothing that the PRT requires you to do that the GCC doesn't actually also expect of you. So it's relevant to all registrants, regardless of the association you're part of, regardless of the style of practice you adopt, because the PRT is all about helping you communicate effectively with patients and colleagues, helping you, supporting you in cooperating and collaborating with your peers, about helping you provide high quality, evidence-based, patient-centered care, about identifying and addressing your learning needs through continuing professional development. And then finally, as part of that, about adopting and ensuring you have good standards of clinical governance. So those are my contacts there, but the Royal College of Chiropractors is very easily found on Google. If PRT is something you're not currently doing and you wish to embark on the PRT, and we've given you a lot of encouragement in that regard tonight, then please do contact us by phone, by email. There's a link there you can see on our website as well, which gives you much more information about the PRT program. So I'll stop there. I'll remain here for the rest of the session, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that you might have later.
That's great, Rob. Thanks ever so much indeed. It's a really great example, I think, of the regulator and the professional body working hand in hand to promote high standards and to develop the profession. So thanks for that, Rob. And I'm really also grateful to Philippa for joining us today. As I explained earlier on, one of the additional requirements that we establish is directed learning relating to CPD. In a sense, as a new registrant, you get a double whammy. You get the clinical governance, but you also get the standard set of directed activities. And we're really focusing heavily on equalities, diversity, and inclusion. As I said, Philippa's been working alongside us to support us with that. So thank you ever so much, Philippa, for all you've done. And I'll hand over to you to set out a few more helpful, wise words of encouragement.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome to everyone. I think you're joining the profession at a really exciting time, and it's lovely to have you all here. So Nick has already introduced me, but my name is Philippa Oakley. I use she and her pronouns. And as well as being a registrant, I also work with the NHS and other healthcare organisations to help them improve the care that they provide to people from minoritized groups. So hence why I got involved in the GCC and their 15-point action plan. So it's been a very exciting year. I would really urge you all, if you're not familiar with the action plan, to look at what the GCC have been doing to advance the profession, because for a very small profession and a very small regulatory body, we've achieved some fantastic things. The PSA have taken notice of what we're doing, the Professional Standards Authority, and I really think that we are setting a very high standard for our inclusivity actions as a healthcare profession. And actually, this is very much echoed in what patients are looking to see from us as healthcare providers. We know that our patients have higher expectations from their healthcare providers in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusivity. And I should say, if I refer to EDI, that's what I mean, is equality, diversity, and inclusion. So one of the focuses, or the main focus, I should say, for the CPD year for this year is EDI and how it relates to our clinical practice. And amongst the registrants, there was a little bit of a brouhaha, for want of a better word, of what this actually meant. And so Andrew asked me to come along today just to speak very briefly on what this means for us as registrants, as practicing chiropractors, and also what we are getting at when we have put these reflective questions together, which Rob and myself have done some work to put these together. And I'm grateful for Rob's support in making sure that these are appropriate for us, and that hopefully they provide an opportunity for us as registrants to look at the way that we are embracing EDI within our clinical practice. Now, you are perhaps at a very helpful stage in your careers whereby you're not necessarily in any bad habits yet. Not that any of us who've been in practice for a while develop bad habits, of course, but we do. So CPD, I think, is sometimes a little bit scary as a new graduate to approach. And sometimes we can look at those reflective questions and think, how do I answer that? Now, in terms of EDI and the questions that we are asking, we've broken this down into two main sections. So the first one is thinking about your professional responsibilities with regards to EDI. How well do you feel you meet these in the assessment and care of your patients? And where do you think the gaps or the areas for improvement might be in your knowledge and its application? Now, EDI is a very, very broad term, but predominantly we have to find a starting point somewhere. And so I would urge you, when you're answering that question, to think about your patients who have multiple protected characteristics. That's often the easiest way to look at it, because it will give you a nice firm starting ground. So we all have protected characteristics, because age is one of them, gender is one of them, sexual orientation is one of them, religion is one of them. So we all have protected characteristics. However, some of our patients will share multiple protected characteristics, and there are what we term intersectional issues in terms of the care that we provide. So if you have been following the GCC on LinkedIn, you will have seen that we have been working to develop a scenario-based, what would we call it, Andrew? A kind of a CPD scenario, in effect, each month, to encourage you to think about how EDI might relate to your practice. So, for example, a patient who is profoundly deaf and who is in their late 70s and who perhaps has mobility issues as well, or is registered with a disability. So with these CPD questions, we are asking you to look at a patient like that as an example and say, how well or how competent do I feel if I were to be assessing that patient? And it's something that comes up time and time again. I see it in Facebook groups. It pops up all the time. Somebody will say, if I have a patient who is profoundly deaf, or if I have somebody who doesn't have English as a first language, am I responsible for getting in a translator? Do I have to provide somebody to come in and to be present as a chaperone in the treatment? These are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about as clinicians. And that's what we're hoping that you will reflect upon and share as part of your CPD for the year. So thinking about whether there are gaps in your knowledge when it comes to assessing a skin lesion in a patient who is from a minoritized ethnic group, so in black or brown skin, for example. It's something I know it wasn't covered when I was at university, and it's something that I think we need to be aware of. We're going to be seeing an increasingly more diverse patient base as a profession, as we should be, and if our EDI efforts pay off, which it looks like they are. But these are the things that we're encouraging you to think about. So the second question is thinking about areas for improvement in your ability to assess or provide care for patients with protected characteristics that are rarely encountered. How have you or will you address this to enable you to improve your practice during the CPD year? And how do you intend to ensure you maintain and develop your professional responsibilities in the context of EDI in future years? So an important part in that section is protected characteristics that are rarely encountered, because we see pregnant patients all the time. It's important, but it's something that we see. We see patients different ages all the time. So we need to think about those situations where if you had, as I did when I was in my first year of practice, I had a patient who'd been knocked backwards off a bar stool and had been left paraplegic, and I didn't have the foggiest clue how I could get that patient on the bench, for example, or whether I was responsible for wheelchair accessibility in the clinic, or whether it was the responsibility of the building owner, these kind of things. So we are going to encounter these patients, and these are the type of situations that, unfortunately, if we aren't prepared or we don't have a plan in place, it's where we can be caught out. So it tends to be one of those situations where perhaps we don't worry about it until it's too late. So hopefully with these reflective practice questions, we're going to be taking a much more proactive approach and a much more inclusive approach for these patients to make sure that our clinics are already prepared, that we have a plan in place, that we have inclusive intake forms for people who've undergone gender affirmation surgery and things like that, or who use neopronouns, all of these things that we need to be thinking about. And it's the relevance of EDI to our clinical practice that is really, really important. So that's what we're looking for. We are not expecting, and I say we as though I'm speaking on behalf of the GCC, and obviously I semi-am, but also as a registrant, I'm also very conscious that I kind of wear two hats, which is helpful. But there is no expectation for registrants to go out and undertake any form of official training course unless you think it would be helpful. There are courses out there, and I would always encourage people to undertake training in an area if you feel that it's an area where you would require more training. But there is no expectation that you would undergo any kind of formal training. This is reflective practice. And we're certainly not expecting you to go out and take some kind of official course to do this. So I hope that's provided a useful summary in terms of what we're looking for and how to get started with these, because it's often the thinking of how to get started with these questions that I know I used to struggle with. But I am always very, very happy to answer questions. I can't sit there and hold hands while you're doing your CPD submission, but I will very much be there with you in spirit. And if there is anything that comes up throughout the year and you want to check in, or you want some signposting towards resources or things like that, very, very happy to help and to provide that. So thank you, Andrew, or Nick. I'll hand back to Nick.
Yeah,
I think.
fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Philippa. That was great stuff and inspiring stuff. And it's good to know that you're going to be sitting beside colleagues as they go through the process. So from me, thank you very much indeed again for taking the time out. It's your own time and we really appreciate that. Well done. Secondly, good luck with your CPD efforts this year. Hopefully we've given you something to reflect on to support you in your endeavour. One of our statutory duties is to help develop the profession, and this aspect is very much part of that. So we're alongside you, as is the Royal College, as is Philippa, as are your professional associations. So take advantage of the support that's available to you. And finally, thank you very much again to the speakers. Thanks to Rob and Philippa, and to Jamie and Sean for coming along from the GCC, and to you, Andrew, for fixing up the whole thing. So wish you well, everyone. Have a very pleasant rest of the evening, and I look forward to bumping into you on my travels. Thanks again for coming, and good luck.